Greetings, believers and skeptics alike. You've stumbled upon Paranormal M, where we explore the unexplained with an open mind. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and most importantly, hit the little thumbs up button and join us on this journey of discovery. Wife brought ghost home. Maybe. I'll preface this by saying that my wife is a scientist and a staunch skeptic. She teaches biology, anatomy, and anthropology at UCSD, and often works with real human remains in her teachings. She was lecturing on human development and disassembled a child's skull to show the plates and how they fuse, etc. However, she didn't reassemble them before coming home. Late that night, I don't know, maybe 2 a.m., I go to the bathroom, do my thing. And when I get back in bed, she stirs and says something like, "Wait, were you just in the bathroom?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" Confused. She shrugs it off. "I thought we were cuddling." The next day she explains that she felt me, but not me, holding her from behind. But the more she thought about it, it was smaller, like childlike. She ends up explaining it away as a dream, and we just kind of let it go. A few nights later, she goes to bed early, leaving me in our living room. A few minutes later, I hear a scream, and she runs downstairs looking truly terrified. She claims to have seen a shadowy figure next to the nightstand on my side of the bed. She described it as the size of a child and staticky, like when a TV doesn't have a signal. It looked like it was rummaging through my nightstand. And when she entered the room, it got spooked, quickly disappeared into our closet. Once she was calm, she again tried to rationalize it. Oh, it was the wind. No windows were open. Or it was just a weird shadow from the lights coming on, in the shape of a child? She maintains her skepticism, but does claim there was a lonely energy, again childlike, like a little kid searching for their mom. The weirdest part of this is that the next class day she reassembled the skull, and nothing happened again. What are your thoughts? I'm pretty convinced. But she continues to deny it and rationalize it away. My experience with demonic possession. My earliest memory with this thing was when I was a kid. I was in bed and something woke me up. It felt wrong and terrible. So I hid underneath my covers like a kid would. And I felt this thing creep up my bunk bed up the ladder and literally just stare at me. I could feel its presence right outside of my blanket. I fell back asleep somehow, desperately wishing it would leave. It would then give me nightmares. For years, as they'd always be the same. I'd be in bed, like I was awake. But I'd be paralyzed and just see it hovering above me. It would always have this shit-eating grin, like it was enjoying what it was doing. It came in many shapes, but the two eye holes and smile will always be burned into my memory. Sometimes in the dreams I'd be able to move, but my body would weigh a ton and I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. I would cry for help to find my voice, and it just didn't work. I'd literally crawl out of bed sometimes and turn on the light to find it didn't work. Sometimes I'd crawl and make it all the way to my brother's room or my parents', but they'd never be able to help me. All the while that thing was there, and just eating it up. The thing is, it's always felt so realistic. Like, I don't know, I was dreaming until I would wake up. It was horrifying. Sometimes it bled into actual waking paralysis. And I would know for sure I was awake, but I would be actually paralyzed. I would see it lurking around my room, crawling on the ceiling, or just hovering right above me, smiling like it loved to do. Eventually, I learned how to fight back. Instead of getting scared in those dreams, I would get angry and swing at the thing if I could. It changed its tactics and started giving me different nightmares. But when my dream self started to notice it getting dark, I jolt myself into lucidity and banish whatever form it took and change my dreams. So it came for me in my waking life. It would whisper awful things to me, make me distrust people and hate myself. I had no idea it was the thing, and it was putting the thoughts into my own head. It sounded like my own voice. It would make me rape myself, make me hurt myself. It drove me to attempting suicide in high school, made me do awful, destructive things. I lost a lot of friends. I'm still traumatized, and I have a sort of shaky relationship with people in general. As I moved out of high school, I got into spirituality. I did a lot of research about energy and entities, and finally put the pieces together. I was possessed. It was a demon. Probably a low-level one, but a demon all the same. At my lowest point after the suicide, it showed itself to me in person. I had just been kicked out and I was living in a total dump of a place. I really hated myself and I was getting drunk and throwing things and channeling a lot of anger. And I guess it was enough for it to manifest because I heard a deep rumbling, almost like a growl, and I could feel something coming from the other side. Then a shadow appeared, complete with horns, a tail, and glowing red eyes. I felt a powerful fear just by looking at it, as if it radiated fear and negativity. It didn't say anything, and I willed it to leave, and it did, or made itself, invisible again. I eventually started to realize that it was feeding on my negativity. It all started with the nightmares, that mindless fear in its smile. I was food for it, or it knew how to play me to make food. So I starved it. I aggressively changed my life. I was already into spirituality, but I devoted my life to it and uplifting myself and clearing my energy. I found God, made His presence the one at my shoulder, His voice the only one that I heard. I even started casting spells and cast a powerful banishing spell. I beat it with a passion. As the paper etched with all of its foul deeds burned away, I actually felt the oppression I had known all my life start to fade. I felt confident in the fact that it was gone, and confident that I could shape my life, just like I had shaped my dreams. I hadn't had any nightmares since then. No physical incursions. I still have some negative thoughts, because, who doesn't? But they aren't nearly as frequent or as loud as they used to be. But maybe it's still there. Maybe it's just silently biding its time, waiting for me to slip up so it can sink its teeth in one more time. Ask Reddit. First one. One Halloween night, I was driving home from a gig in a sparsely populated area. Not the woods, but pretty close. I come around a corner and a woman in a sexy nurse costume comes out of nowhere. Literally seemed to burst from a bunch of bushes on the side of the road. I hit the brakes. She does that disjointed kind of walk akin to Silent Hill nurses across the street. I never saw her face. Her hair was all crazy and covered. Also, her clothes seemed, I guess, askew would be the most appropriate description. This lasted maybe 10 seconds. I thought she would let me in on the gag when she reached the other side of the road. Nope. She just jolted her way into a wooded area. I was freaked out and thought about driving away, but something gave me pause beside the obvious. There was just something not quite right. So I pulled over and yelled out if she needed help. No response. I called for another couple minutes and kind of walked the area where she went. No trace, so I drove off. No other houses looked like they had lights on. Everything looked shut down. I was shook. 2 days later, I read an article in the paper. It described how they found a woman's body matching the description of what I saw dead under a tree in the woods. I even called the police department and filed a report as being the last person to see her alive. Alive in quotes. There were some sketchy details with the domestic partner, but no one really knows what happened to her. Second, like I said before, I toured all over the country for music. Me and my wife played a gig in Lafayette. But we had to drive back to North LA after, in the middle of the night for business-related reasons. We hit the road after midnight, but before 1 a.m. No one out on the roads. Super dark out. We took 10 back to North LA. If you've ever been on this road, you know that a good portion of it is like a giant bridge over swampy, weird lakes, 20 to 30 feet off the water. So a couple of hours after leaving, we were driving and chatting about stuff, talking about the gig, about the next day's events, etc. I casually flicked the high beams on and we both went silent. Me. Did you see that? Wife. Yeah. Me. What do we do? Wife. Keep driving. Faster. When I flicked the high beams, we both saw a person climbing over the edge of the barrier on the side of the road. I think a spirit pretended to be my cousin. My only paranormal experience happened around 2007 to 2009. I would have been around 8, maybe 9 years old. These experiences happened at my cousin's house at the time. To keep their identity anonymous, I'll call them Jem and Ellie. Jem is 2 years younger and Ellie is the same age as me. For context, I would often go over to their house for play dates and sleepovers. My uncle was usually never home because he was constantly working. My aunt was usually in the kitchen or caring for my newborn cousin. They don't live there anymore and moved out about 6 years ago. I'm sharing this now as an adult after reflecting on my experiences with my cousins. I will also be sharing some of their experiences as well. Also, when I say their, I'm referring to Jem and Ellie. I can confidently say that every time I went over to their house, I felt a weird sensation of anxiety. It was an unspoken rule between my cousins and I that we move around the house in pairs. The house felt heavy and like somebody was always watching us. Their house had 3 floors. The upstairs consisted of the 3 bedrooms. The main level consisted of the front porch, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, and the back porch. And the basement, which consisted of an open layout as a laundry room. The only space that felt safe was the front porch and living room. That's where we would often play. Now this pair system would only be done at their house. The times where I would have to go around the house by myself, it felt like somebody was behind me or following me. I remember always rushing around and I hated going to the bathroom. The bathroom on the main floor was underneath the stairs. It was very small and kind of like a Harry Potter closet, but slightly bigger. Gave me major creeps. The first event that made me feel eerie about their home happened during a sleepover. It was the next morning and we were all eating breakfast in the kitchen. This Saturday my uncle was not working. I remember feeling excited because that meant my cousins and I would be doing something fun. My aunt didn't drive, so we were often just staying at their house. Anyways, it was a normal morning and we were all eating when we heard the loudest bang upstairs. I remember it shook the ceiling above us. We just all stopped eating and stared at each other. I was so scared because I knew, well, no one was up there except my baby cousin, and he was only months old. My uncle immediately went up to make sure he was okay. Luckily, he came back and said he was sound asleep. He also said everything upstairs looked fine. Nothing fell and everything looked exactly like it did earlier. We still didn't know what it was. Now, the experience that validated my constant feeling that there might be spirits happened during a family party. It was my uncle's birthday, sometime in August or September. It was a relatively big party with maybe 50 plus people. They had a big backyard. All the adults were outside under those white party tents, you know? Most of the kids were huddled up on the couch in the living room watching movies because it was raining that day. The living room was next to the stairs going upstairs. I was sitting facing the stairs and remembered Jem leaving because she wanted to play in the rain with some other kids. Some time passed, and Jem came back inside. She announced that she was going upstairs for socks because hers were wet. I saw her go up and back down to go back outside. Some more time passed, and my aunt, her mom, came inside asking where Jem was. Ellie responded saying that she was upstairs. I didn't think anything of it because I was focused on the movie and honestly didn't care to correct her. So my aunt called Jem from the bottom of the stairs. Well, actually, she screamed her name, and we, as in all the kids in the living room, heard Jem's voice respond in Spanish. It took me a couple of seconds to realize, wait, I saw Jem go outside. That's when I told my aunt. So she went upstairs and just came down laughing nervously. She was like, she's not there. My aunt told Ellie just to go get Jem from outside. Maybe 2 minutes later, Ellie came back in with Jem and my aunt started questioning Jem where she was. Jem came back hella annoyed because her big sis interrupted her fun. Thinking back at it now, I feel like my aunt stayed there in the living room with us to validate what she had just experienced. I remember her asking us, "You all heard Jem, right?" While Ellie went outside to get Jem. She was stunned, to say the least. The rest of us were too. Jem and Ellie have a lot more scary experiences at their old house than I do, but I'll just share one. This specific experience they had was a big deal. I remember right after it happened, a priest went to bless their house. It was a whole weekend ordeal. Family and friends visited their home to pray for hours. At the time, my cousins didn't tell me what happened because it was so traumatic for them. I heard it from my grandma, who's telling my mom. I'm telling the story now that my cousins told it to me as adults. At the time, they both had their own rooms, but never slept alone. They always slept in Jem's room together. They both were scared of being in Ellie's room because they experienced something touching their hair once. Sharing a room was never an issue because of how scared they were at night. They shared with me that they always had that eerie feeling like somebody was watching them at night. It often was difficult for them to fall asleep easily because of the paranormal activity they would experience. This specific night, their mom had just tucked them into bed. As they were trying to sleep, they both heard a woman's voice humming between them. They say they remember the voice right next to their ear. Immediately, they both got up and ran off crying to their parents' bedroom. After this moment, they could only sleep in their parents' bedroom. My uncle had to buy a king-size bed because they refused to sleep in their room. And after maybe a year, they began to sleep again in their room. The blessing of the house seemed to help settle everyone's nerves. My theory is that whatever this spirit was, it didn't like men. I was at their house a lot, and the only times I would experience things was when my uncle was present. My aunt has shared with me as well, that her most scary experiences are when there were men at the house. Obviously, as kids, we can't really contextualize this and are fearful of this feeling that we can't explain. Looking back now, my cousins and I agree that this spirit didn't have malicious intent towards us. What type of entity is he? I will not go into too much detail since the entity watches me, knows my thoughts, and is around me almost all the time. I don't think this man is evil or anything like that, but very possessive. I don't need help to know if he's real or not. I've already figured out he is after dealing with him since I was 5. I just want to know if there's a way to figure out how powerful a being he can be. Has anyone dealt with something like this, and did you know if they were dangerous or could do a lot of damage? I don't think he wants to hurt me, so I'm not worried about that. But I also have a knowledge that even when my body dies, I won't be able to leave him. He gets mad when I think of him as a demon, or a god or an angel, like a negative pressure in my head. But if I think of him as a soulmate, then he's happy. A relaxing, tingling chill runs down my body. He doesn't say things directly. I have to use the pressure and tingles method to figure it out. Even typing this much information is making me feel ill. This whole thing's kind of embarrassing to admit. Haven't told a single person in my life about this. I thought this was in my head, but it's not. Does anybody have experience with something like this? If there's different levels of entities or beings, or is it just another soul, like the same ones humans have? Could he actually be my soulmate from my past life? Or he just didn't incarnate with me in this life? I'm a 32-year-old female and a virgin. I've wanted to be in a relationship, and I've had a good chunk of men throughout the years show interest in me. I'm not super attractive, but average looking. But it's never really gone anywhere. Like every event in my life was designed to keep me isolated. I'm allowed to fantasize about fictional men who look like him, but that is the farthest I'm allowed to go. Can an entity do that? Can a human soul do that? That story was interesting. What do you guys think? Ghost encounter that happened to me and my boyfriend. I always believed in ghosts and that they could be real. Felt like most likely they are, like I believed people when they told me things. But it's really hard to wrap your head around. Also kind of scary, so you kind of try to deny it. But you can't, and you don't know what to believe. But I can't deny now after witnessing it. My 2 encounters were both a year ago. Maybe a year and a half. My boyfriend was there both times with me. So number 1, the scariest one. We got off work and he was living with his cousin that had 2 young daughters. So we get there and knocking to get let in. We were calling because we were locked out. So maybe a few minutes later we hear his daughter inside saying, "Mommy, Daddy, wake up, somebody's here knocking on the door." Definitely her voice. And so we're fully thinking they're home now because she wouldn't be left alone without a parent. So after a while, we're still outside and his cousin gets home. And his daughters jump out of the car. So I'm looking at him like, what just happened? We were both freaked out. He doesn't like talking about it. He never believed that stuff before, but he does now, I'm pretty sure. What they call a mimic spirit. Was watching stuff on TikTok about it. Very creepy. The other experience, we were sitting in our car, just broad daylight, when we heard a loud, clear knocking on the back car window. We turned around and couldn't see anything. So we checked the mirrors looking everywhere, and there wasn't even anyone close to the car or even in sight at all. It's spine-chilling. We sped off and avoided going there since. The ghost experience that went through a generation. When I was younger, around 7, I would hang out often with my 2 cousins, one 7, the other 6. They used to live in a very old dentist's, so it was pretty creepy, very strange backstories. Although I personally didn't have more than one paranormal experience, they had many, which I won't go into depth in this post. So, we were bored and I had heard about ghost hunters like the little paranormal nerd I've always been. I suggested to go find some ghosts, and C, the 7-year-old cousin, suggested to go down to the basement. C was paranoid, but we convinced her to tag along. She begged their sister, 13 maybe. She begged her for her phone to get one of those apps. We downloaded it, and off we went. There were a couple of rooms all pretty empty, from like a few toys which weren't large. We found a quiet room after looking and getting a large chill, probably a warning. Sat down and opened the app. The app used a radar with red dots signifying the spirits. There were smaller ones, and each time it got closer or bigger, we got excited. There was a large one getting closer and closer until the lights went off. I heard a laugh and chills went down my spine. The biggest chill ever. Felt like there was a man dancing around us. Me being a Christian had a cross and some water which I blessed with a tutorial, sprayed it and held the cross saying a prayer. Guess that worked as the lights went back to normal. When I say we dashed, I never saw anyone move quicker. We went to the barbecue, everybody relieved and had a big sigh as we were gone for hours. It was like 2.5 hours later, explained the story, and they nervously laughed like they were hiding something. We went on with the day, although nervously. Now, me being 15, I remember it vividly for the wrong reasons, and me and the cousin met up with our Nana who was there that day. She explained everybody was freaked out because when they moved in and explored the basement, he said the same thing happened to my dad, their dad, and their sister. Personal encounter with an entity as a kid. So I never really believed into ghosts or any paranormal entities as a kid. Back then, during what I believe was my very first encounter, I was around 12 or 14 years old. It all happened very fast, and I simply couldn't explain what even happened to this day. It was evening. I was alone in my room. My parents were in a different room. I was just playing video games until I started noticing how something shadowy started appearing behind the corner in a hallway that led into my room. I've seen it just once with the corner of my eye, and I swear I even managed to see it move its head away to hide back. It didn't bother me that much at first. I brushed it off as some illusion or my brain playing tricks. But then minutes later, everything changed. I suddenly saw what I can only describe as some kind of transparent shadow humanoid floating entity flying into my room. It was chaotically moving from side to side and towards me in a very fast manner. I immediately ducked my head down in fear and just looked again, and it was gone. At this point, even after years, I argued with myself that it must have been some kind of illusion or hallucination. But there was one nuance. When I saw the above-described entity fly at me, the ceiling light flickered a few times when the ghost moved beneath it. There was just no way it was a coincidental flicker, because the ceiling lamp was brand new. Nevertheless, I can't stop thinking about that encounter for some time now. There were no reasons for a ghost, if it was one, to appear appear so suddenly. The apartment wasn't haunted in any way and had no negative history. Is there a category or a name for ghosts who take objects and return them in the same spot they took it from? If so, I'd like to know more about them, why they do it, and who they could be, or if they're even a ghost. So to begin my tale, the earliest I can remember is missing objects. That's ever since I was around 14 or 15. I'm 20 now. I got a ring for my 15th birthday. It would often disappear and would always randomly be on my dresser after weeks and months of it being gone. Now I always suspected something was wrong because it's a ring I would take care of really well. I wouldn't let it out of my sight so easily. But then it began to be like a game with other objects that I used often, like hair ties or controllers, and instead of months it would be minutes. First I used to blame it on my carelessness and just my inability to find objects. But today, I confirmed my suspicions. An hour ago, I was looking for my AC remote, which I always keep on my nightstand for easy access since it's next to the bed. I looked to my nightstand and it's not there, so I looked everywhere through my bed and flipped the room inside out. Then I look under the bed, and when I stand back up, there it is, the AC remote perfectly aligned with the corner of the nightstand. My mom needs some answers about some possible childhood paranormal experiences. From about age 5 to age 11, when my parents divorced and we, Mom, me, and 4 siblings moved in with my grandparents, I had the same recurring nightmare. In the dream, I would see myself sleeping in bed, in the exact nightgown I was wearing that particular night. I would wake up to a growling noise and see a pack of dogs coming toward me. There were 3 of them, and they were black and kind of smoky with glowing red eyes. They would come to me and start pulling at my nightgown and clawing at me as I kicked and screamed. Always before they pulled me out of bed completely, another dog would come in. But this one was different. It was much lighter and its eyes were a dark brown. It would snarl at the others and bite and pull at them until they evaporated like smoke. The other one would just turn around and leave. After all these years, I can still remember how it felt in the dream. And I have issues with large dogs. I have never felt so unsafe and scared in my own home. I've never really experienced anything paranormal in my life, until recently. To be honest, I wasn't fully sure that I believed in ghosts, but I liked the stories. Nice. The other night, me and my best friend were having a sleepover at my house. It was 1:30 a.m. We decided to go into my kitchen and get something to drink. I have a bathroom off to my kitchen, so I decided to use it first thing. Walked in, closed the door behind me, and locked it. I live in kind of an older house, with not many renovations. So the lock in this door is one of those stupid ones that you have to push it in until it clicks. I am 100% sure that I closed this door. Halfway through my piss, the door flung open and the lock popped to be unlocked. I immediately tried to close it again because, well, and when I tried to, it felt like somebody was pushing on the door to open it. I opened it a little to see if it was my best friend, but no one was standing there. I just closed it and continued on, but quickening my pace to see what my best friend wanted, still telling myself that it was just him. When I walked out, he was halfway across the kitchen. I asked him if he opened the door on me, even though there wasn't a single chance that he did. He obviously denied it. I shrugged it off and started pouring myself a drink. I then heard light footsteps approaching me from behind. I assumed that it was my cat, but nothing was there when I turned around. At this point, I'm not scared, but just confused. Me and my best friend wrapped up what we were doing and started heading up the stairs. From the top of the stairs, you can see into the entry of the kitchen, and I saw feet and legs standing there. Stared at it for a few seconds to make sure I wasn't just psyching myself out. Maybe it just wasn't a shadow, but I know what it was. I quickly ran into my room and stayed up for a bit before we got my confidence to go to bed. That night I had a terrible dream about the spirit in my kitchen, and it was extremely aggressive toward me. I woke up in a cold sweat and couldn't sleep again. Around 2 p.m. the next day, my friend had left. My parents were at work, so I was alone. I was in the kitchen boiling some water on the stove when my electric kettle randomly turned on behind me. I mean full speed boiling, as if it had been boiling for minutes. Quickly turned around and looked at it until I realized it was not plugged in. There was no way this kettle would work without being plugged in. Turned it off and then plugged it in to see what was going on, and now it won't even work. I quickly went to my room and remained there until my parents got home. Later that night, I was in my room and my TV turned on, and out of nowhere, I didn't sit on my remote or anything, and it was across the room. Now it's 2 a.m., and an hour ago someone started aggressively banging on my bedroom door. My parents are asleep and snoring, and the cat is in my bed. No one else here. So, what do I do about this? Encounters with 3 entities. Throughout my life, I believe I've come in contact with 3 different types of paranormal spirits that have affected me in one way or another. Very different type of situations. The first situation occurred when I was 6. My family moved into a new town in a very old house. The house we moved into had a bit of history that we learned about later. An adolescent who lived in the house tried to commit suicide at least 3 times. Twice in the house and once in a big cedar tree out front. We didn't find out about it until we'd recently already been living in the house over a year, and there was really nothing we could do that didn't mean we had to move. But it wasn't like it really should affect us. For the first few months living in that house, I would often wake and find pieces of this small china tea set on my headboard. I recall one very vividly. It was heart-shaped, gold-trimmed saucer with a lady in a yellow dress waltzing with a guy. Total, I got about 8 pieces. My sister got about 5. My mom and dad had no clue where they were coming from. We also had a very protective St. Bernard in the house, so no one came in. While my sister and I were getting presents, my mom woke one night hearing our St. Bernard growling in my brother's room. A sharp shard of glass was laying on his pillow next to his head. Our St. Bernard would always sleep in my brother's room after that. The second entity I've come into contact with, it's going to move fast forward to like 1.5 years. My mom is friends with a lady, Mrs. Bradstream. My older brother's in class with one of Mrs. Bradstreet kids. I don't know if it's Bradstream or Bradstreet. It's summertime. They're moving away, so my mom offers to help with the garage sale. There's like 8 kids total, ages 15 down to like 4. At one point, the 15-year-old asked me if I want to go inside. It was hot out, so I did. I'm like 7. Somehow we ended up sitting in his closet. He asked me if I wanted to have sex with him. I knew sex was only for mommy and daddy, so I left his room. Good move. As I got downstairs, they had blankets over the windows to keep heat out. In the living room, I saw it. A tall figure leaning on the back of a sofa. His face was burnt. It was like an amber in color. Very long and angular, dark sunken recessed eyes. It held a hand out toward me, took off running outside, and wouldn't leave my mom's side. Fast forward again, and I'm 19 at university in Juneau, Alaska. A bit of backstop here is that it's kind of relevant, I think. I think they meant backstory. My friend and I were in the same course and coming home late at night, probably around 10 p.m. At the school, you walk 1.5 miles on the path in the woods to get home from campus to housing, with the highway halfway through it. It was very snowy. I was wearing boots, so I was clearing a path that sort of cut through the snow that had been falling. As we got up to the intersection, there was another student who was standing up there wearing boots, shoes, and jeans. So I told him to just follow us, and I was nice and polite. Told him I would break a path. Then he started kind of stalking me. I'll not include details of the stalking. If you want to know, you can ask. He ended up getting kicked out of school. But right before he got kicked out of school is when the event happened. I was walk campus. I was by myself in the middle of the day. I was on the path and at the top of the hill, and all of a sudden, standing in the woods in front of me was a tall figure, wearing dark clothing. It was that figure with the burnt umber face. It held its hand out to me again. I remember just seeing a horrible tug from inside myself pulling me toward it. I just stood there staring at it, and it's like pulling me, it's like tugging. And I'm just like, finally, I'm like, no, and I turned and walked away. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that if I had let that tug pull me into the woods, that my stalker probably would have killed me. I'm sure that that being is showing up at a time in my life where I have a decision to make. Either go this way or that way. Either death or SA or get away myself. So far I've gotten away. Terrifies the hell out of me even thinking back on those situations, knowing 100% positive it was the same figure I'd seen when I was 7, when I was 19. The next incident that I came across is back in my hometown. Before I can really tell about the incident, I do feel it is imperative to tell a little background about my hometown. My hometown is in central Minnesota, and is one of the sites of the Ceedox uprising where homesteaders were violently killed. There's actually a memorial on the outside of town. It's about the White Family Massacre, telling about the Ceedox uprising and how the White family was slaughtered in their home. So there's very violent history around this area. Back in 2013, I was moved in with my uncle. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, and he had lived alone, so I moved in. My uncle and I got along very well. I loved him dearly. Then he passed away in the house. It was about 3 or 4 days after he passed in the house that I started noticing things were off. There was a pillow that had been in my room on the top of a shelf that was suddenly in the living room. I moved the pillow from the living room and I put it in a cupboard behind the cabinet, like a big heavy wooden bookshelf cabinet that must have weighed like 50 to 75 pounds. It wasn't easy to move. The next day the pillow was in the kitchen. I put the pillow in the garage and it was back in the house. The next day I put the pillow in a shed. It was back in the house. I don't know what was going on with that pillow, but it wanted to be in the house. I ended up pulling the stuffing out of the pillow, and I burned the pillowcase and used the stuffing and made a little stuffed animal that I still have. It sits on my bookshelf. It's been staying there ever since. Been there about 8 years now. Then the other ones, I made other pillows and gave them away. Nobody had any issues. Recently, a neighbor of mine passed away in their house, and his nephew was living in the house with them when everything happened. The nephew stopped me outside and asked me if I knew of any paranormal things that have happened around this area. I'm like, yeah, and I told him that I'd had this experience with the pillow. He told me that the day after his uncle had passed, when he took a shower, he had seen a small childlike figure walk past the shower. Nobody was in the house, but this figure walked by and just left finger lines across the steam on the shower wall. I was outside a couple of days after he had told me about that, and I saw a light go on inside the neighbor's house. I checked the vehicles outside, and nobody was home. The lights were on, and in about 3 minutes, the lights went out. They did this for over an hour, flashing on and off. So I asked my neighbor if they had like smart lights that would go off and on, kind of flicker when you don't have a good connection. He said no, they never got any of those. So I mentioned the light going on and off, and I guess that happened when he was there one night as well. After the figure, he was too afraid to go do anything, so he just left the house and went out and slept in his fish house. I'm pretty sure that the town he's in is haunted by the spirits of the Sioux warriors and victims from the area who were part of the massacre. And it's like when death occurs, they come and they try to make us uncomfortable. Voices calling out my name. I wouldn't say this is a ghost or something, but me and my friend when we were young were on the stairs, just talking, when suddenly we both heard somebody call my name. The voice wasn't familiar, so we just stood at the place frozen for a while. Then we got our senses back, asked who it was, but no answer. We went down to check, but no one was there. It was a deep and manly voice. A few years later, we were going to the basketball court in our society on our way there, and we just again heard somebody call my name. But this time in my dad's voice. But he wasn't in the town at the moment. There was this little girl with us, and we asked her if she had heard it. She said no. There were even people around us that we asked them, but nothing for some reason in that moment. Truly felt like only we could hear it, because until now I never questioned why the people around us couldn't hear it. Since two people heard it, can't possibly be our minds playing tricks on us. We weren't even thinking anything horror at the moment that could lead to hallucinations. It was always my name that was called out. Still haven't figured out who or what it was, and it still bugs me to this day trying to figure out what it was caused by. Nothing has happened since. I don't know, does anybody know what this could be? Something I saw as a kid. I was at my grandma's house one time. I was around 4 years old at the time, and it was right after Halloween. And I say this because I remember the tiger costume I wore that year. But anyway, I'm sitting on my grandma's lap, eating some candy and watching TV with her. When I happen to turn my head back and I see someone moving from one of the bedrooms to the bathroom across the hallway. It happened fast, and the figure was all black, but not like a shadow. It was a solid cloaked-looking figure. At first, I didn't know what to think. I just kept watching. I thought maybe it was my cousin Easy playing a prank on me. He liked to scare the shit out of me back then, but Easy wasn't there. He was supposed to be at a friend's house, and it was just me and Grandma until my grandpa got off work later. So I sat there watching, and after a little time went by, I remember seeing the figure sort of poke its head out from the bathroom and wave at me. There was no face. It's like it was wearing a black veil and hood over their head. Anyway, it disappeared back into the bathroom before doing it again, popping out and waving at me. This time I alerted my grandma and told her there was someone in the bathroom. I was scared because I didn't know or understand who this could have been, but I know what I saw. The grandma gets up and walks down the hall to the bathroom. Mind you, no one ever exited the bathroom. Of course, after looking, there was no one there. I even followed her and looked myself. No one. So we checked all 3 other bedrooms after that, and there was no one in the house but us. I don't know what it was. I don't know where it came from. But this is something that has always stuck with me. Years later as an adult, I've had 2 dreams about the hooded shape and being whatever, that's it. I've never encountered anything else like it before, and I say this as somebody who's had his share of ghost-run encounters. Anyone else have any ideas or similar experiences as a kid? Yeah. Stalked by by a Yosemite nightcrawler. I was 18 years old, living in a remote village nestled at the base of a looming mountain. I hadn't even smoked a cigarette or had a drink back then. I was definitely ill-prepared for the darkness that lurked beyond the safety of our tight-knit community. Our village veiled in an air of mystique, with a secretive religion of its own called Druze. It seemed shielded from the outside world by the towering peaks that surrounded us, and protection rituals that the sages would do. Little did I know that the sense of isolation would soon become a breeding ground for the inexplicable horrors that awaited me. It was midnight. The silence of the night enveloped us as my friend drove his 2008 Mazda 3, a shitbox that you wouldn't want to be in when shit goes down. Amen. Navigating the winding roads that went through the fields of cherry and apple trees, everything was going well. Just another drive around the fields. We were in the middle of our usual chats. Suddenly, something shot across the road with alarming speed, a blur of movement that left both frozen in disbelief. Turned to my friend, seeking confirmation in his wide-eyed expression. Without a word, he nodded, his grip on the wheel tightening. As he focused on the road ahead, I dared to glance to our right, where the trees cast long, twisted shadows in the moonlight. That's when I saw it, a figure unlike anything I'd ever encountered, tall and lanky. It moved with an unnatural grace, weaving between the trees as though they were mere playthings. Its skin, a sickly shade of white, stretched out over skeletal limbs, and its face was a grotesque mask of emptiness, save for a twisted smirk that sent a shiver down my spine. In a haze of fear and disbelief, I found myself behind the wheel driving faster than I have ever thought possible, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding before me. But even as we raced toward the safety of the village, the creature seemed to taunt us, darting effortlessly between the trees on our right, a chilling reminder that its unnatural speed could easily catch up to us, even though we were going 100 kilometers an hour, through twists and turns, too, and it somehow managed to keep up. The horrors of that night stay with me even now, etched into the very fabric of my being. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the memory of that encounter refused to fade. It haunted me, lurking in the shadows of my mind, waiting for the opportunity to strike again. And strike it did. One fateful evening, as I stood with my friends in what used to be a cherry field, now turned park, having a fun night out with the boys. As I finished eating, I asked where I could wash my hands. They pointed me toward a portable sink placed between rows of trees. I felt a bit of serenity as my friends' chatter faded and my mind calmed down. But as I glanced out into the darkness, my heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the white nightcrawler, its form barely discernible as it lurked behind a truck of a nearby trunk. I pretended not to see it all, played dumb and walked back to my friends as if nothing had happened. What else could I do? I felt that it's best to just let things settle down naturally, because confronting such a malevolent force seemed futile, and fleeing play into its hands. So I chose to carry on, to live each day with the knowledge that the darkness still lingered, waiting to strike once more. It sent shivers down my spine. I live now because that creature had mercy on me. Years passed, yet the memory of that encounter refused to fade. Found myself drawn to the whispers of the sages, their tales of otherworldly beings and ancient rituals offering a semblance of understanding in the face of the unknown. Has anyone ever encountered a nightcrawler here? Glenbeulah Cemetery, non-fictional story. Hey guys, I'm just reflecting on something that happened probably 11 years ago now. And I would have been around the age of 10 or 11. Hang with me, I'm not the best writer. My parents were really into paranormal activity shows. They claimed that they've had encounters as well. Anyway, one night they decided they wanted to go to one of the most haunted cemeteries in Wisconsin to check it out. So we packed up the car and headed to Glenbula Cemetery, also known as Walnut Grove Cemetery. After about a 2-hour drive, we started to pull down the windy road that ended at the cemetery, only to find there were people already there. Must have been close to 11 p.m. When we got there, we pulled up to the gate and the people approached our car and told us that we needed to leave due to it being private property. We didn't have permission to be there. My parents apologized, told them that they wanted to check it out because it was known as one of the most haunted places in Wisconsin. Told them that we'd just leave, but just as we were about to turn around, one of the men stopped us and told us that they were a paranormal activity investigation team. They offered for us to join them for the night, and we agreed. As we started, they placed a few flashlights with fresh batteries around the cemetery. Explained to us that if they had any spirits around, that they would draw the energy from the flashlights. We would know if they were there. After about 20 minutes, the flashlights would start flickering and then turn off. This happened a few times throughout the night, and each time the batteries were drained. Nothing crazy, but we were intrigued. One of the stories from the cemetery is that some people would see a childlike figure peeking out from behind a tree or sometimes playing. So the team we were put with, they put out a red ball that a child would play with. This ball was at the bottom of a small hill, and I shit you not, we were all standing around and this ball began rolling up the hill. There was no wind or anything that could have rolled this ball uphill. I couldn't believe it. At some point, one of the guys that we were with sort of took us by one of the headstones at the back of the cemetery. We were sort of played at like a voice recorder. I believe that's what it was anyways. We played it in reverse to get that static noise you see in ghost shows. He began asking questions with nothing until he asked for a certain name. Wish I could remember it. We finally hear something abnormal, but nothing crazy. He then asks if this is the name, and it responded yes. We couldn't believe what we were hearing. He then asked when he was born, and you could hear the old man's voice say the year. Once again, I really wish I could remember, but I was a kid. It was unbelievable. You only ever hear or see the stuff on TV shows, but to be there in person, hearing it was just insane. The spirit eventually stopped talking, and suddenly I felt something touch me, and a flash of red orb go by, which everybody else saw. Then one of the flashlights sitting on a stone that had died a while before began flashing again, and as soon as someone went to touch it, it stopped, wouldn't turn back on. Pretty freaked out, we decided to take a break and go hang out by the trucks for a minute, have a soda. While I was following everyone, and I was in the back, I had turned around to look back at where we just were to see a child peering around the tree at me. I screamed and it disappeared, and everybody turned around asking what was wrong. I didn't even know what to say. I was scared out of my mind. So we all end up at our trucks, just hanging out for a minute, just talking, telling stories and whatnot. And then one of the guys decided that we should all go check out the old gravestones. As we were checking them out, he told us to be quiet, told us to listen and ask questions to the dead, basically trying to get them to do something. While he was doing this, he had me put on a headset that amplified sound around you. Well, a little time goes on, and suddenly I see one of those red orbs again off in the woods. I believe they call them red eyes or eyes. It's quickly gone. I was a little freaked out, but didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin whatever was going on, when all of a sudden I feel something cold on my neck, and I hear someone or something whisper my name. I looked at my mom because I thought maybe she was trying to ask me something and I just couldn't hear her right because of the headset. But she wasn't even looking in my direction. I took a few steps when suddenly I hear my name again this time, and it was loud and it was stern right into the headset. I looked up to see a manly figure running at me. I threw the headset off and started crying and freaking out, and I didn't have any words to say what had just happened, and just everybody there was with me. I uncontrollably was freaking the fuck out. My parents decided we needed to get the hell out of there, and we left. Up until that day, I never really believed in that stuff, but the things I saw and heard that night were far from imagination. It was one of the scariest, most unexplainable things I'd ever experienced. Ever since that night, I've had unexplainable encounters. Sometimes, I don't really believe in anything, but something might have attached to me that night, if that makes any sense. This is something that I didn't talk about for a long time because I didn't think anybody would believe me. But here I am, finally telling the story from that night. My personal encounter dump. 1. I was around 6 or 7 when this first happened. I was sleeping in my room upstairs when I suddenly wake up at night and I hear something walking slowly up the stairs. I check if I'm dreaming. I wasn't. I sit there, too terrified to move or speak. The noise doesn't go away. Awake for maybe a half hour, and somehow whatever was making the noise is still climbing the stairs. Felt like the sound was progressively making its way up the stairs, but at the same time wasn't moving. It's impossible to explain, and I don't remember what happened after. 2. This was also around the same time as the last one. It was nighttime, and the family came back home after a drive to some place when I look out the window and I see a clothed humanoid figure walking down the sidewalk. Its upper half was inhumanly, just leaned all the way back, and its head was almost touching the ground as it walked. Its torso and arms were limply flailing like its top half was paralyzed, being carried by its legs. I told my parents, and being how young I was, wrote it off as a drunk person. 3. This happened when I was 10 or 12. I'm yet again sleeping in my room when I wake up and see something down the hallway. I sit up in my bed with the most powerful fear I've ever felt in my life. And as I stare at it, and it walks to my room. It was dark, but a nightlight shone its silhouette. Its upper half was humanoid, although it was missing a head. But its under half were horse or maybe spider-like. I don't entirely remember, but it stood over me as I was frozen in fear, and like the other story, I don't remember anything of what happened after. Which is really strange. It's like I have a blank in my memory, and like I should be able to remember, but it's just not there. I'm almost certain I wasn't dreaming in this one. 4. This is more of a UFO encounter, but I thought I might as well put it here. This happened when I was 15. I was taking my dog out. It was nighttime again, and I noticed something moving in the sky. I look up and see massive colored circles moving inhumanly fast across the clouds. They were either behind the clouds or just translucent. Some of them disappeared and some reappeared and moved in circles or lines with mechanical movement. It went on for 3 or so minutes until they ceased. 5. This isn't from me, but a story my brother shared. He worked at a high school as a custodian during the night, yet again. I don't know the specifics, but according to what I remember, he told me he saw a shadow from inside a classroom walk past a large window. He went into the classroom and felt something walk past him as he did. While I'm at this note, I might as well also mention how he once refused to sleep in his room and he claimed that he's felt something touch him as he slept. This wasn't just a week-long event, though he didn't sleep in his room for years until finally we swapped rooms and I was now sleeping in his room. My brother is not somebody to make up things like this, especially to tell them to my parents. 6. Kind of coming off of the last story, after sleeping multiple nights, me in his room, I've had several times where I've woken up to sort of a presence looming over me, having a spike of adrenaline. Can kind of even make out a face when it happens, It almost looks like some sort of ancient statue. Not that I'm using it as a connection, but just that I have no real other way to describe it. It's made going to sleep really difficult for me. True story of my encounter with an unknown figure. My name is Bahman. I'm 20 years old and male. I'm from a small village in the north of Iran up in a mountain area surrounded by a large forest. The story is for 2 years ago when I was 18, 2021. It was partly cloudy. I was going to go for a walk in the forest like every day. The main path of the forest crosses from behind of our house, so it wasn't like a long walk, but it was just deep in the forest. A dirt road with trees around you as far as the eye can see. It was kind of late compared to usual. It was like 5:30, 6 o'clock. It was getting dark, but because I was familiar with the path, I wasn't worried. I was thinking I'll be back soon. It just kind of made me go for it. I was about 20 minutes into the walk. It was just kind of keep getting darker every minute. You get to the part of the path that's straight road for like 1,000 feet, and you can somewhat see the end of it. And as I was slowly walking in that road, I see a dark figure at the end of the road. Just a black thing standing in the middle of the road. It was like a dusk kind of time, so I wasn't sure what I was looking at specifically in the distance. My first thought was that it was probably a cow. It's a village, so many people have farms around here. Sometimes they let their cows in the woods for days, but in kind of a large group. But I thought, then why is this one alone? Most importantly, why is it not moving? Believe it or not, I don't know why, but I didn't stop. It was the curiosity maybe, or just didn't want to be a pussy if it's a prank or some guy from the village. I don't really know what I was thinking in that moment. I just remember just looking at the thing without a blink as I was walking toward it. The thing that creeped me out the most was why the hell this thing didn't move an inch. I was just getting more and more scared as I was getting closer to it. I started to see a shape. It was like a tall figure, long and skinny legs. At one point, I think I saw a third leg or maybe a stick in his hands. I don't know exactly, it was so blurry. I kept walking and still not knowing what I'm looking at. My heart, it was just coming out of my mouth. Stopped at maybe 60 feet of the figure, just looking at it standing still without a single move or anything. I didn't have the courage to say anything. I remember just thinking, fuck it. Turned around, walked away. As I was walking back, I constantly looked back at my shoulder, paranoid of seeing that thing move. But every time it was just standing there and kept getting more further away and finally out of sight. It was almost completely dark at this point. After a few turns, I kind of calmed down a little bit. I didn't get that worried. Didn't run home like crazy, and I kept walking normal, and I tried not to think about what just happened. I just started working with my phone to maybe call a friend to just talk with them till I get home. And just before that, for the last time, I looked back. Something I wish I never did. I saw something that traumatized me for life. Still makes my hand shake from fear to this day. I saw the same blur black figure standing still in the middle of the road looking at me like 50 feet. I didn't stand there to see it move. Or not this time. I just run for my life. I run like if I stopped I would die. I didn't look back once. I just run home. When I get home, my hands and feet were shaking. Something that I've never experienced, and I hope I never do again. My family was worried too, after I told them what just happened. They told me I was hallucinating, but I could tell from their eyes that they're shocked and scared as I am. I never experienced such a thing again, never mention it with anyone until today. But this experience will forever be in my mind, and it'll haunt me forever. See ya.